Spanish. Hello and welcome to the IDiFICO Insights podcast. I am so excited and honored today to have Hermon Aparicio with us. He is currently serving as Program Manager of Early Innovation and Partner Development at Trimble Ventures. He's also co-founder of 0 to 60, a global accelerator program designed to identify and support innovative startups in the AEC industry. He is also a lecturer at California State Polytechnic University, Pomona. He is brilliant, and I am very excited to have him, so welcome, Hermon.
Thank you for having me. Super excited.
Yes. All right, so let's dive right in. You started out as an architect, so you've been in the industry for a long time, and you pursued tech pretty early on, so tell us about that journey.
Yeah, so I studied, my background is in architecture, like you mentioned. Studied at Cal Poly Pomona, where I currently teach. I'm alumni, and kind of went on to work at some of the leading design engineering firms, including places like Arup, AECOM, Autodesk, and others. Yeah, somewhere along the way, really was kind of fascinated by the tech side of things, right? Project delivery, kind of the different challenges that we were facing at the time in delivering these complex projects really required kind of a full suite of tools, right? I don't know. When we think about projects, we think of buildings and we think of like one model. In reality, these things are made up of multiple models,
So
true.
True.
That sometimes can go up to terabytes of data these days, and authored in multiple softwares, right? And so I spent a very early part of my career kind of developing tools to make these different technologies talk to each other. I went on to get a graduate degree in design and computation to help solve some of those challenges.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So tell me more about when you say you designed tools to talk to each other. So if most of our audience is really more on the AEC side and not the tech side, how do you help them understand what that means?
Yeah, so I think it started in grad school, right? So kind of good segue during grad school, we're talking about a lot about tool making and design and computation, like how do you encode knowledge, for example. One of my favorite classes was kind of looking at the history of computation and how it's influenced design and construction. And we also spent time, looking at like manual processes. So we would go to like the glass blowing lab and just kind of research on those manual processes and think about how you would build software to automate certain aspects of that workflow, let's say your process. And I think that translates also into the built environment and various workflows that we use even today, or approach to processes that we use today. And so it was then that I kind of was influenced by this idea of tool making informed by processes, manual processes that could be automated. And then kind of took that experience and went on to work for some of these design engineering firms post grad school, where I was in the Bay Area, working and teaching at the time, running research before joining Gary Technologies in Los Angeles. And it was then that I got a chance to kind of implement some of that in the consulting world, where we were working with various customers and implementing, like I mentioned, various softwares on a project, focus on project delivery, and then to your point, building bespoke solutions to make a lot of these technologies kind of talk to each other, ensuring that the flow of data was moving from one software to the next. A lot of these projects are made up of hundreds of people located all around the world. So you're pushing data, across the globe. And like I mentioned, these models are often made up of multiple files, authored in various softwares. And one of the challenges in working that way is trying to figure out what's the source of truth. So it was around that time that CDEs, or common data environments, became available. I'll date myself. Before that, it was all like SVNs, FTPs. These are solutions that software developers were using to co-develop software, write code around the world. And those kind of were being used in the building space, but it weren't appropriate for 3D data sets, which is mainly what's mainly used, right, in architecture, design, and construction. And so It was around that same time that when I was at Gary Technologies that G Team, now Trimble Connect, was developed to help deliver Frank Gehry's projects. Gary Technologies was a sister company of Frank Gehry Partners to deliver his projects and a number of his friends' projects around the world, and had the opportunity to work on a number of those solutions.
That's an awesome career path so far. Can you fill us in on Trimble?
Yeah, great question. So it was in 2014 that I had joined Gary Technologies, and I happened to be on, say, one of the last employees I got hired by Gary Technologies. The CTO at the time, Dennis Sheldon, was my thesis advisor at MIT, so we had a really nice relationship, and he invited me to join Gary Technologies back then before we were acquired by Trimble in 2014, and Trimble essentially acquired Technologies for this CDE platform that I was mentioning called G Team at the time, now Trimble Connect, and the consulting arm. So yeah, G Team went on to become Trimble Connect, and the consulting group at Gary Technologies went on to become the consulting group at Trimble. So Trimble Consulting, where I continued to work on projects around the world, had the opportunity to implement both Trimble and non-Trimble technologies on these building projects, still focus on like project delivery, solving some of these challenges that I was mentioning, where you have models, again, very complex models authored in multiple platforms, and federating data, looking at project coordination as an example, collaboration, right? Teams across the globe made up of hundreds of people. Had the fortune of working at places like VTI in Glendale, or worked on Mexico City airport project, Mexico City, just traveling the world, working on multiple complex projects, implementing these technologies and seeing the challenges firsthand.
Yeah, amazing. So from like, let's put ourselves in the shoes of an average construction manager who, maybe is working on an airport project, just as an example, to help them kind of understand. So your role, how does it relate to their role in, say, on the Mexico airport?
Yeah. So a lot of my time was spent with design teams. So I mainly focus on, I guess, conceptual design, schematic design, design development, all the way through construction documentation, a little bit of CA. But a lot of what we did, right, really influenced the deliverables that were handed over then to a CM that they would use for construction. And a project like Mexico City is essentially critical because a lot of that is data driven. The design was a space frame roof that eventually project was canceled, but kind of getting to the point where we needed to move from design development to construction documentation, right? We needed to take the design. This was a joint venture between Foster and Partners and Fernando Romero. So offices in London and Mexico City, both teams kind of co-located in both cities. And, the overall design was a space frame design roof made of nodes and links. And the entire design essentially driven by a database of points. And you had to reconstruct it. So think about points in an Excel sheet that had to get reconstructed in these various softwares. So it was living in Rhino, CATIA, Revit, you name it, where we had to translate that data set into these various softwares to then produce a set of construction drawings, right, from design development to CDs.
Okay.
And so the source of truth in that example was essentially the Excel sheet, right? The coordinates that were geolocated would translate into both virtual space and then physical space. And so there's a translation that happens there. And then also translation into the virtual world that then gets documented in the form of 2D and 3D documentation in the form of drawings. And so having control over that, was essential. And then when you go deliver this project for a CM, right, to answer your question, they would take the drawing sets, because we still live in this antiquated world where drawings are the main deliverables.
Yeah.
And they essentially, that's your contractual delivery. So they take the drawings and, in this case, because the source of truth was a database, they essentially just archive those drawings and then go by the database to recreate any models they need for coordination, to federate any other constructible models that they're looking to build and create details for. On this design, you had areas that were like, it was a build-up roof. So it started as space frame, and then it had cladding and panelization and glass. So it's this layering of systems. And to really understand the different angles where materials came together, you really had to like build constructible level models. So going from, in the industry we call like LOD 200 to LOD 500, where you could actually build from the constructible model itself. So yeah, the CM would take that data set, rebuild their models, and then check against the design information.
Fascinating. Okay, so what do you see like coming out? You're seeing very early stage tech companies in AEC. What are you seeing starting to emerge as, usable tech for the industry?
Yeah, I think there's a number of usable tech, just kind of going back a little bit. After my time in Mexico City, this was circa 2016, I started working with startup companies and co-founded this accelerator program that you mentioned called 060 out of the consulting group at the time. I started working with startup companies in the industry. This was 2018. We co-founded this accelerator program. And the idea behind that, or the motivation for creating this accelerator program, was to work with startup companies, being on the consulting side, working on projects, building bespoke technologies, like I mentioned, on some of these complex projects. After the project was done, a lot of these technologies got thrown in the trash, like they were never to be seen again. And I figured there's got to be a better way of doing this to really, because we started seeing the same problems project after project. It's like, there's got to be a better way of doing this. Why aren't we partnering with startup companies and developing solutions that could really drive change in the industry? And so we co-founded this accelerator program in 2018 to work with these startup companies. And at the time, there were like, very few startup companies, little accelerator programs in this space, specific to AEC. There was obviously the like Y Combinator, right, which is the gold standard for accelerator programs. The challenge with those type of programs, they don't have subject matter experts in house, so they really rely on the network of professionals to serve as mentors and advise these companies. And so in 2018, decided to launch this accelerator program, work with startup companies. Some of the companies, including startups like Hypar, TestFit, Monograph, Tonic DM, were kind of our guinea pigs. So shout out to those companies, and thank you for working with us so early on and taking that risk, given that we didn't have any experience in working with startup companies. But we had a chance to work with them and understand what it was that these startup companies needed help with. Essentially, these companies are looking for customers. So working with our accelerator program was one way to get introduced to strategic customers.
Yeah.
Another thing that need help was go-to-market strategy. And so if you think of Trimble is really made up of acquired companies, right? So a company of companies, and a lot of the founders in those companies that were acquired, like myself, who came from Gary Technologies, continue to work at Trimble. And so they serve as subject matter experts for these type of programs. But to answer your question, what it was that these companies are working in, Hypar, for example, was a company that's founded by Ian Koch and Anthony Hawk that came out of Autodesk. Anthony has a background in working at Revit as a product manager. I want to say Ian, a background in developing software, coming from engineering side as a formerly trained. Started this company, also a background in developing software. He was the father of Dynamo, which is used on top of Revit today, which is essentially a graphical user interface to develop solutions. Built a company called Hypar, looking at kind of the next version of that software. Like, why are we building scripts, for example, to automate tasks over and over? Why can't they just be packaged into packages that live in the cloud that you just call on? For example, like a panelization script, you just call on a surface and does it automatically. Reusable libraries was the concept, and not needing a subject matter expert, right, a computational designer to create a script each time you had to solve that issue. really cool company, doing really great things, and I had the pleasure of working with them in 2018 as part of this. And so we started seeing this trend, of more and more people kind of leaving their day-to-day jobs, right, in design engineering and starting their own companies. And so it was just perfect timing to launch this accelerator program, be able to partner with them, which later became continue to working with startup companies, 2 to 3 companies at a time. Later launched an initiative with SketchUp last year, actually, to work with, to scale this program up and work with more startup companies, where we launched a challenge to build 9 integrations, and doing that again this year, which I'm really excited about.
Okay. So what do you think what changes will the average person who works in AEC see over the next 5 years due to these technologies that are rising up?
Yeah, so if I go back and think about my time at grad school and then my professional life in consulting, what I've seen over the years, right? A large adoption of like building information technologies, the creation of specialists like computational designers to create bespoke technologies and make a lot of these things talk. One of the challenges in the industry is that these things live in silos, and so consulting existed to facilitate, like I mentioned, the data exchange between these various platforms for project delivery. So it spent a lot of time like automating tasks, for example, something as dumb as translating drawings from one format to another so they can be reviewed and redlined, right, by the design team that then would be shared with the let's say drafting team or modeling team or just project team in general. Today, a lot of that is being replaced, or we're seeing startups that are coming online leveraging other emerging technologies like AI and machine learning. So I'm really excited about the technologies that are being developed today in this space, and they kind of encompass different aspects of our industry, right? Just thinking about the project life cycle of a building, very early stage design, looking at concept design, where you can leverage Gen AI to create renderings, for example, or to schematic design, where you can, create models from those conceptual images, through CDs, where you can automate drawing production, and then beyond. So looking at like the CA space, where we're seeing AI being leveraged for contract documentation, or AI and scheduling, AI and different aspects of these different phases that I mentioned. So a lot of exciting stuff happening there, and it's a moving target, so it's changing every day.
On the contract side, this is purely AI? This is not a blockchain play at all?
No, so one company that comes to mind is one of our portfolio companies with the Trimble Ventures team, a company called Document Crunch, for example. They're focused on contracts, so they developed a solution, and that's available, and that's kind of got started with AIA contracts, right? Kind of affecting them, and so connecting the field to the job site. So whenever you had like a weather delay, like what contractual obligations would that trigger, right? If an event happened on site, it used to be that you had to have, the CM, let's say, on site, have to call the office, speak to the attorneys, like what contractual implications will this have, and who does it affect? Do I need to send out a notice into which people? And so the solution essentially streamlines some of that, where a person on site can just log into the software, ask AI bot that question or chat, and get that reply right within seconds instead of hours or days, and create a delay. Also, one of their features is that it'll create a report for you. So it's like a cheat sheet. That's what I believe they call it, for people on site to be able to have that information handy, and they're kind of expanding beyond that into documents in general. So it's a really exciting company to be looking at.
Absolutely. And all of it feels like it has implications for what I'm creating too. So it's very cool though. I love all the streamlining and making lives easier, right? Like that would hopefully be the goal at the end of the day. But what's making it hard for these to be implemented? Like why do you think we're so behind as an industry?
Yeah, I think it goes back to even when thinking about like building information modeling, right? That was a big emerging technology in the early 2000s, let's say, even mid 2000s. And it's really the challenge is just cultural. It's like a lot of the people in the industry, maybe it's just career risk adverse people who are slow to adopt these technologies. They want to make sure they're proven before they're able to adopt
Yeah.
it and risk their careers, right? And bring it into organizations. So often this emerging technology gets adopted by early adopters, right? And used on pilot projects. And so it's why I think accelerator programs are so important, is because you get to work with startup companies and team them up with uh, potential users of their technology, early adopters of the technology that could provide feedback to make their products a lot better and get better market fit for the industry. But yeah, I think the challenge is mostly cultural, right? And so a lot of what we're seeing today with AI and the challenges in implementing and adopting I think are the same that we saw with previous emergent technologies like building information modeling, like moving from one system like CAD into a new paradigm, essentially, which was building information modeling, going from 2D to 3D, right? Which was at the time very necessary because a lot of the complex projects that I had the fortune of working on, like really couldn't understand from a 2D perspective. So it was required and necessary, essentially critical that we move into a three-dimensional environment to look at it from a constructible standpoint. So a lot of the challenges that I see today, AI, machine learning, other emerging tech like augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality, you name it. It's IoT. It has to do a lot with people being, I guess, career averse. I think the adoption, though, maybe the time, the lag is maybe shortening. And it has to do maybe with the acceptance of these emerging technologies with consumers. So
Yeah.
consumer perspective. So
Right.
thinking about like IoT wearables,
Yeah.
right? Before the iWatch, this was the future, but then the iWatch came and it was like the everyday people becoming data driven and understanding analytics, like, and how that influences behaviors. It's time to stand up. It's time to move. You reached your steps for the day. Training somebody that way and then translating that into our own industry, being data driven, understanding like what a daily report looks like on progress on the job site and how you can leverage these technologies to make delivery of projects more efficient, I
Yeah.
think is helpful. So AI today, I think will probably take less to adopt than some of those previous technologies that I mentioned. I think with the use of ChatGPT and realizing how fast these things are moving, people implementing in their daily lives. I know our organization, for example, has made these tools available across the board. So everybody from administrative level, executive level, to project managers, to engineers, like we're adopting AI across the organization to try to make everyone more efficient in their everyday lives.
Yeah. And I think people are just more comfortable with it in general. And it's almost like they've come to expect it, those who are like rising up in the industry and maybe a little bit younger are, just more comfortable, well, scrolling, if nothing else, right? So
Yeah,
if you're
yeah.
making tools that feel like the user experience is similar to something they're already familiar with, it's going to be less difficult to get them to adopt it, I would think.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, a lot of the people, right, you mentioned I teach at the university as well, my alma mater, a lot of these students that are graduating the university, they don't know a world without the internet, for example.
Yeah.
Like, I'll date myself here again. Yeah, I remember the world before internet was available. I think I was an early adopter. I would use computers and would dial up, use dial up to get onto the web, but people take that for granted with the mobile phones being so ubiquitous and being able to get up G signal or access Wi-Fi today to access the internet wasn't always the case. I think
Right.
people who are being born into using these technologies natively, even expect this in the workforce. So if they're using AI in school, like they're expecting to use AI in their careers, right?
In their
In their
workplace. Yeah.
in the workplace, correct? So I think we'll see a generational, to your point, demographic changing, moving from one generation to the other. I think we'll see a greater adoption for that reason.
And maybe people feeling more willing to cross over. So those who say you're an architect for 10 years and then you have an opportunity to work for a tech company, like an individual who's been doing that for 10 years might be more willing to take the jump into a tech company than say a superintendent who's, closer to retirement. So I think that's true. Have you read up on what Apple Health is doing?
No, not specifically.
Yeah, I was looking at it because I was at the doctor recently just for my regular checkup, and wondering, like, I had read the day before that, they're moving further and further into health where they actually, so I had a long conversation with Chat about it. Now, whether or not it's actually what they're doing is, it may or may not be, but the way that it envisioned it is it will be monitoring your every move, everything you eat, and so it will notice if something is off in your body, and it will let you know, and here, let's watch this for a week, try this to blood pressure, for example, try this to decrease your blood pressure, right? And if it doesn't, then I'm going to make you an appointment with your provider, and your provider actually also works for Apple, right? And so it's like this all encompassing platform that is just there and available to you. And I'm watching this closely because as people start leaving their W-2 comforts and they're looking for, healthcare, okay. So that's one of the reasons I'm very curious about this, right? And so I think it sounds really cool because I'm an early adopter, but I could see people not loving the fact that it knows literally everything you're doing at every moment. But when we think about that, and then how maybe some things like that affect our industry too, I don't know. It's just fun to think about.
Yeah, it's super interesting because that's essentially was the promise of big data, right? Like we've been collecting data for a while now.
Yeah.
I remember coming out of grad school talking about big data and how you've collected more data, in the last few years than we have since the beginning of time. Like we started talking about terabytes, petabytes, zettabytes of data collection around the world. And the promise behind that was that we'd be able to not only get insights, right? So we could do data analysis, but then also build predictive and even recommendation systems. And I think that's what we're seeing today is kind of the evolution, right? And the fruits of the labor of collecting all this data is to get those insights, but also now start to create systems and platforms that will make recommendations, could even, like to your point, automate the scheduling of a doctor visit, right? Like it's time for you to visit. We want the doctor to look at these areas. Is because of that data collection that was possible, which a lot of it happens to be structured data. This is one of the challenges that we're facing. How do we take those lessons in those industries and bring it into our own industry,
right?
And design and construction? It's like we are continuing to collect this data. It just lives, I think, in silos, right? Either through software vendors or through various organizations. So a design firm might have this data that exists in the form of drawings or through its people resources, right? This issue of knowledge transfer. A lot of the industry professionals are essentially aging out. So there's this issue of workforce where the new generation doesn't have the same knowledge as the generation that's aging out. Like, how do we transfer that knowledge to this new generation or encode it, right? In, let's say in the workforce, so that we can leverage AI and somebody who's new or getting onboarded to organization can just ask the AI a question and get the response as if the most senior person in the organization was sitting right next to you at all times. I think that's what we're getting at today.
Yeah. But I think about too, like, when I'm talking to, I think I was talking to a multifamily architect not long ago, and he was saying how, they're often, especially in Seattle, they're under NDA. So this information, he was like, we don't use AI at all. Like, we are not allowed to download it on any of our systems because that's in order to honor our clients, right? But the detriment to your workforce, the people who work for you who aren't learning how to use this, bro, I don't know if you're going to survive. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just an interesting time, and how everyone views it is so different. But I think about these models are being fed stuff that doesn't belong to them all the time. And so I'd be curious if we were just like constantly feeding the data of every organization in AEC into some sort of LLM or something similar, like what would be the result of that? I don't know. I'm kind of just thinking out loud, but that it would be
Yeah,
fascinating.
I think software companies understand that, and they're starting to create, on-premise deployments of LLMs. They also promise, they have it in their what is it, use in their terms and conditions, essentially, that they won't collect your data and use it for training. And so I think they're becoming easier to work with. I mentioned our organization is adopting these technologies, understanding that, you know, the data that we have is not being used to train other models. And so I think it's getting easier to do that. Companies are able to adopt these technologies, create even, or say, fine tune their own models, right, using their own data sets to be able to leverage those insights that I mentioned for each organization.
Yeah, yeah. And it's probably a safer way.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, so one major industry challenge is translating digital designs into seamless execution on the job site. So, what technologies or workflows are making the biggest difference in closing the gap, and where do you see room for improvement on that?
Technology's closing the gap. Yeah, I think it's a lot of the same tools that we've been using for many years, and I think the tools that maybe are going to continue to be as leaders are tools, or I should say platforms, that develop open ecosystems. And so I'm thinking about SketchUp, for example, at Trimble, right? We have many solutions, but the SketchUp team last year, we did mention a pilot project. We work with a number of startup firms. One of the goals behind that initiative was to partner with startup companies to develop solutions on top of SketchUp as a platform. And so I think what's so great about that is, like, the customer has a challenge. They look to different vendors to find those solutions, and when they might get a solution that has, like, serves them like 80% of what it is that they need, and they might need to complement that with third-party solutions, or develop a custom solution for themselves. That's why I think consulting was so successful for many years, because we had to make these technologies talk to each other. So we'd often build these bespoke tools that I mentioned, leveraging APIs and SDKs for these many platforms. And so to fill some of those gaps, right, that you're mentioning here. So I think the future of this tech is leveraging these platforms and creating ecosystems, not just of solutions for each vendor, but also integrating third-party solutions. That's why I think programs like the Trimble 060 program that I mentioned are so important, is because we work with startup companies to build integrations on top of our platform, but they might have like one piece of that overall workflow. So if you're thinking about project delivery, just in one of the phases, right, going from DD to CD, like the Mexico City example that I was mentioning, where you might author a number of the design data, right, using like a handful of tools and leverage like 80% of their features, but then there's that other 20% that you're going to want the third-party solution or the startup company developing or leveraging an emerging technology, right, like AI, to create and federate that information to a single source of truth that you can leverage for project delivery. So I'm excited about the future of open ecosystems, excited about the future of small companies that are leveraging these emerging technologies that are more agile than, I think, a large company, right? Having worked at Trimble for over a decade, things move a little slow, and that's because we have thousands of customers that use software and expect it to, every time they open it, to work a certain way. And so making changes sometimes is difficult, requires real consideration to put it on a roadmap. And especially when you have an emerging technology. And I think that the SketchUp team is pretty innovative in that sense, and open to doing these things. I think they've made a great headway in that direction, and starting to see releases of things like assistants and chatbots, and early implementations of AI. But an organization like that, like ours, can only do so much. And so
Yeah.
working with startup companies, I think, is the partnership, right? The combination of having a large software vendor like Trimble working with a small startup company, like many of the companies that participate in the Trimble 060 Challenge, is really interesting to create this ecosystem of startups, software vendors to create solutions that really drive change in the industry.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it like that yet, but that is an interesting take of having both, working together. So, what do you think the big companies are learning, or Trimble or others like it, right? Are learning from the startups, and what are the startups learning from the bigger firms?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier what, the early days of the accelerator program, we learned what these startup companies are really in need of, essentially introductions to customers. And being
Yeah.
a large organization, we work with many different types of organizations, small, medium, and large. We have enterprise customers. And so facilitating those introductions has been very fruitful. They also need go-to-market strategy, right? So helping work these companies, thinking about how to go to market, finding that product market fit, especially in the early stage phase, like how to find that product market fit and help scale in that direction, I think has been very helpful for startup companies. From a Trimble perspective, working with these startup companies, we get to see how these founders are thinking about some of these emerging technologies. So AI space has been really interesting. Last year, we got to work with a company called Surface as developing an AI platform, and they're looking specifically at repeatable construction projects. So think about data centers, right? Think
Yeah.
about retail, where you might have a prototype, right, of a building or a warehouse, and you're trying to build it on a new location, right? And so you might have these business requirements that live, let's say, in a PDF
Sure.
or some most likely Excel sheet that you need to encode into
Yeah.
software. And so they're leveraging AI, building a platform where you can build agentic workflows, right, to help deliver some of that. So going from like site inspection all the way through construction documentation, which is really interesting.
GCs better be watching out, huh? Maybe.
Yeah, and I think they too can be partnering right with these startup companies, and so one of the goals behind our I'll call it a startup program, right? My role now at Trimble is in as a program manager is to develop programs to help with early innovation initiatives such as the Trimble 060 Challenge. And so one day I would like this to be kind of a self-serving program where you're able to work with any startup. At the moment, it's essentially a challenge where we have a call for participation, which I can share on here. We just launched our call for participation, about a week ago, and we'll be closing our call for participation in May, where we select 9 companies to work with. This year, the challenge is focused on Trimble Connect. Last year, I mentioned it was focused on SketchUp. This year on Trimble Connect, so more AECO, looking at 3 different categories. So design, data, so connected design, connected data, and connected field or job site. So we're looking for startup companies, entrepreneurs, and developers that are developing solutions in those space to build an integration on top of Connect. And that might be as part of a workflow that includes other technologies like SketchUp, Tekla, or others. And so we have this call for participation going on where we'll be selecting 9 companies at the end of May after a close, and then launching our kickoff meeting, in July in Westminster, and spending 12 weeks together building integrations. One thing that we're trying to do different this year is bring customer voice on board. Right, so we bring various customers to the table to provide feedback, right, help these startup companies find that product market fit, provide feedback on the integrations that they're building, and validate, right, a number of the things that they're building, then showcase them at our annual conference in November called Dimensions, that's hosted every year in Las Vegas. So super excited about this initiative and working with startups to build these very solutions. Last year, was a really successful event that we did with the SketchUp team and had sponsors like NVIDIA, HP, Canvas, Chaos,
Awesome.
AWS. They gave a special prize to one of the companies called Scale Thought Award. which now has gone on and gotten acquired by Epic, which was really exciting news recently.
That's amazing. I love that. And I will keep my eye out. I mean, I'm a recruiter and I love to connect people. So we'll certainly keep my eye out. But I'm curious, we met at Built World. So we should shout out Built World. So
Really?
Thanks for introducing us. Love that organization. And we talked a little bit about IDiFICO, I know, but I'm curious your thoughts. I mean, I see ways of partnering, in lots of different ways in the future potentially. But, just your thoughts on Project Execution Network and what we're building.
Yeah, so what's I think is really interesting about your platform, thinking about my previous experience working on like the Mexico City project, right? There was a number of talent on that project that belonged to our organization, and maybe that organization got the contract because of that person, right? So we like to, in consulting world, consider them hired guns, right? They have like a subject matter expertise that they bring to the table that no one else essentially can do. And they're usually hired onto a project and then like they leave. And a lot of these people you see jumping from organization to organization, but they build this like expertise over time, and like that's the person that you want to have on your project. So having people like that on your platform, or instead of having to belong to a specific organization to hire them on a project and be able to facilitate that, I think is super interesting for our industry. But long term, I think it's also super interesting because of the way that things are trending, specifically with AI. We talked about using like chatbots in our everyday to increase productivity. I think this year we're going to be talking a lot more about agentic workflows, right? So in addition to using chatbots, using AI to automate tasks. So if you think about, back to my consulting life where we had to develop workflows and create automation optimization, I see agentic workflows kind of an extension of that, where you outsource like the translation of data, right? Going from one file format to the other is part of our overall workflow. So I spend a lot of time essentially, translating information, making sure that the people had the right source of truth, the latest and greatest sets of information that is being translated in the right format, so they can import or export it into the software, making sure that the software tools could talk to each other, so people could do their everyday work. I think a lot of that could be replaced by AI these days, seamlessly, kind of in the background. And so this idea of agentic workflows, I think, is going to be a big theme here in 2025. And moving forward, I see AI as a future team member, right? So getting back to IDiFICO, I could see that becoming a platform, not just for these hired guns with specific skill sets, but also a platform for AI agents where why can't I do the same job delivering a complex project with 200 people with 20 people enhanced by AI agents, right?
Yeah.
Right. If I could process map each of my workflows and then kind of outsource specific tasks that no one wants to do anyway. Nobody wants to sit and translate data and wait for the computer to do its job. Like, why can't we have an AI agent do that in the background, wake up in the morning and have it ready for you to do your next step? So I'm really excited about platforms that allow for something like that. I mentioned a lot of the startup companies that we're working with as part of the Trimble 060 initiative are developing these type of solutions. So working with them to be able to integrate them into our own Trimble solutions, I think is really exciting. But being able to see a platform like yours, IDiFICO, where you have all this talent, resources living on there, potentially agents in the future to deliver projects, I think that's a really exciting future to be living in.
Yeah, me too. Yes. And I mean, I think about like you work mostly on the private side. I imagine your clients are mostly private, right?
It's a mix. So we work with government agency as well, right? On the owner side, I've worked with various agencies where a lot of their biggest challenges is data security. So having software deployments on site. So talking about Trimble Connect, for example, and being able to make that the security on that to a certain standard for them to be able to use and implement on projects is very important. So it's a mix.
Okay. Yeah. And so it will be a mix for us too, right? So, being able to serve both, public agencies and the private side, I think, is going to make for some really interesting output. So thanks for your vote of confidence. I appreciate it very much. Okay, so let's see. You work closely with both experienced industry leaders and emerging talent. What role does mentorship play in accelerating innovation, and how can the AEC industry better support the next generation of professionals?
Yeah, I love this question. It's a great question because, I, as you mentioned, work for Trimble, developing these innovation programs, but I also teach part-time, right, at the local university and work with mentoring students who are entering the workforce. So that's an area that's I'm very passionate about and interested in. And so I think key to that is something that we talked about earlier, and it's this idea of knowledge transfer, right? We're seeing the previous kind of generation of professionals kind of aging out of our industry, and a lot of the knowledge that they have about how to build buildings, right, is leaving. And so how do we transfer that to the earlier generation? Because the reality of students leaving university, they don't really understand how to build buildings, right? They understand how to use software, they know how to use technology, they can design concepts, but building a building, I think, just is very hard to replace without experience, right? So how do we transfer that knowledge, kind of going back to my graduate school days, like how do you take something like glass blowing and code it into software to be able to automate certain tasks, I think is much needed today, and coding knowledge that lives with this older generation to be able to share with the younger generation through potentially AI, I think is very exciting. So maybe that's an angle. We haven't talked about your platform. You have all this.
It is.
All these. Okay. Yeah, in capturing that, I think what we're missing is for organizations to start documenting, right, all this knowledge. Some organizations are better than others. When somebody gets onboarded and joins an organization, they get like a manual, they get training, they get given like a mentor, somebody to show them the ropes. I think some organizations are better than others. Others you kind of just figure out on your own. But if we can better document things so that they can be encoded into software, potentially AI solutions, that when somebody joins the organization, they can just ask a question and get all the information they need, in a matter of seconds, I think is really, really important.
It is, and I also think that I genuinely believe that those who are retiring want to impart the information. I know I would run into a lot of construction managers and superintendents who would say, they wanted to get hired really badly, right? And so they would say, like, I want to mentor. But the problem was my client, who is usually a big GC, would say if they want to mentor, that means they want to teach them their way. They don't want to teach them our way. And that's a problem. So we're not going to hire them, right? So you ended up with, I think, a lot of talent who left the industry feeling kind of burned. And my hope for the platform was not necessarily to bring a bunch of people back, but for those who are retiring and just want to do, be a hired gun, but then they want to take a break and then they want to be a hired gun again, but then they can also kind of be giving back by mentoring. But how do you capture that, and so my hope is to have the platform be able to connect individuals who, are brand new to the industry and those who have all these years of experience, and then capture that data someplace, right, so that it can be used for the masses, but also human to human. So it's definitely a part of what we're creating at IDiFICO.
It's definitely an important part of our industry as well, right? We have a history, like architecture in particular has a history of apprenticeships, for example, is how you used to get that knowledge and expertise to become a good architect yourself. So mentorship is super important. Also in the startup world, right? We have a lot of first-time founders. I think being able to find mentors that can help you with different aspects of building a business, I think is super important. That's something that we try to offer as part of our Trimble 060 program, linking startup companies with our subject matter experts and everything from engineering, product management, go-to-market strategy to fundraising, right? Through our Trimble Ventures arm, like we have sessions where we talk about what VCs are looking for in early stage to growth stage companies. And so we invite people from our network to come have those discussions and impart some of that knowledge to our startup companies.
Awesome. And so needed. Okay, so last question. What excites you most about the future of AEC technology, and what do you think will be the defining trends that shape the industry over the next decade? So we sort of talked about that already with the next 5 years, but what are you most excited about?
Yeah, I think 5 years now is like such a long term
Huh?
way to think about things because, like I said earlier, they're just changing so fast. So I'm just looking at 2026, maybe 2027 these days.
Right.
I read an interesting article recently about AI 2027, and it talked about what the world will look like in the next 2 years. And so I do see, right, the rest of this year being defined by these agentic workflows that I mentioned, where you can have agents beyond, having chatbots where you can ask questions and being text-based, right, through multimodal. Now you have, voice agents. You also have agents that can produce images and videos, now 3D models. I think agentic workflows where you have agents create tasks is going to be a big thing. We'll see a lot of companies that, have automated workflows, kind of extension of the earlier work that I was mentioning, driven by AI agents, where you have AI as a team member, right? Is something that is really exciting. I think it'll start, with having like one AI agent on each of the teams, or as a partner where you can go work back and forth to make yourself more efficient. Beyond that, I think what's interesting that I got out of this article that I was mentioning is, like, at what point are we going to see AI making other AIs? Right? And that's, I think, coming like in 2026 and 2027 as we start to build out these data centers, because a lot of AI requires compute, right? It's kind of limited by compute power.
Yeah.
So as these data centers come online, we start creating new models, training new models. In the next 2-3 years, we're going to see AIs building other AIs. And I think that's going to be an interesting point that we'll get to, when kind of what is the role of a human, and the way that I see it today, which might change, in the next 6 months or the next year. But I see humans managing other AIs, right? AI workflows.
Yep.
So I could see platforms coming online where maybe AEDiFICO, right? Where you have people who are familiar with building these agents or agent workflows, where you hire a team of AIs to execute certain parts of a project, right? So if we're talking about our industry, there's definitely various aspects that can be automated, that can be augmented. We'll see these technologies essentially take over tasks, which leaves room for us humans to do all the fun things, right?
That's right.
That we're interested in doing.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
like to think of it in an optimistic way. I'm very optimistic about the future, where the glass is half full instead of half empty. And so I'm very excited about that future, where we are enhanced through AI and able to focus more on the things that are more important in this world.
That's right. I think we'll be staring at a screen less and talking to each other more, simply because the screens are doing the work now, right? So in some ways, that's how I talk to my family about it, my parents, and it's you don't have to enter into Salesforce anymore. Like, things will just it'll do it for you, and so I think I'm a glass 3/4 full. So anyway, well, Hermon, very great to have you here. Thank you so much for talking with us today, and I'm excited to see you again this week. Just really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today.
And likewise, thank you so much for having me. Super excited to have shared my experience, where I think things are going, and also our Trimble 060 initiative. So for anybody who's interested, happy to share a link to that, and hopefully
Yes.
Working together in the future.
For sure. And send me the link, so then when I post the podcast, I can also just post the link for anybody who's interested, if that is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So anybody who's listening to this, you're a startup, if you're looking to develop anything, in AI, machine learning, focus on connected design, connected data, connected field or job site, and interested in working with Trimble, please feel free to reach out, and excited to potentially be working together.
All right, good stuff. Thank you, sir. We will see you very soon.
Thank you. Take care. Cheers.
All right, take
Bye.
care. Bye.